Of course, it was always planned that Ukraine's President Zelensky would be heading to the White House for a meeting with President Trump after the US-Russia summit in Alaska on Friday. But now, it seems, rather a lot of top Western prime ministers and presidents and chancellors are going to be joining him. So what, you might be asking yourself, is prompting half the leaders in Europe to go with President Zelensky to see President Trump on Monday? Well, this analogy occurred to me. When I was a kid, if my mother saw me making a face, she'd say, "If the wind changes, you'll stay like that forever." No more of a bizarre suggestion than some of the things that are currently official United States policy, of course. However, just 5 days ago, the Europeans had been speaking to Trump, and he'd come round to accept and support their principles on the Ukraine war. Then he went into the summit with President Putin, geared up to argue for a ceasefire, no concessions on territory, and so on. As we all know, a couple of days later, he had spent 3 hours with Putin, and suddenly he had a different look on his face. One that said that a ceasefire wasn't needed anyway, and territory swapping was essential. With President Zelensky then due to go to the White House on Monday, the Europeans clearly became alarmed that at this point, the wind might be about to change, and this Putin-inspired vision of the conflict would end up being Trump's ongoing face to the world for the next few weeks or even months. All it would take would be for the meeting between Trump and Zelensky to go off the rails.
You don't have the card.
For Trump to then get fixed in his mind exactly what Putin had been working to place there. That the obstacle to peace is Zelensky, not Putin. MAGA voices were already rehearsing this on Twitter today. Eric Doherty, for instance, telling his 500,000 followers about Zelensky, "This guy seriously better not blow this peace deal up." Sorry, whose peace deal are we talking about? Because A, last I heard there was no deal, and B, last I heard, if you have two warring parties, then a peace deal is not a peace deal, unless both sides have agreed to it. Oh wait, my mistake. If European leaders are going to undermine President Trump's peace deal, why should we continue to back them with NATO? Either get with the programme, or we're done and you're on your own. So yes, European leaders are thinking the wind could change, and that will represent the face that gets stuck on the front of America. So worried are they that this could happen, and if it so happened, it would become a crucial pivot point that might see the full weight of the United States piling pressure onto Ukraine to accept Russia's terms. Basically, they are throwing everything at this meeting, on the presumption that yes, Trump might be inclined to bully Zelensky if the discussions don't go his way. But it will be a very different dynamic if many leaders are all in the room and they are united. And they are throwing the leaders of the biggest European countries at it, all those that are G7 members, along with some of those who get on the best with Donald J. Trump. Plus one person who sits in both of those groups. So G7, Britain's Starmer, France's Macron, Germany's Merz. So Trump's favourites, Finland's Stubb, who reportedly bonded with Trump over a good game of golf, NATO Secretary Mark Rutte, and the single member of both groups, of course, Italy's Giorgia Meloni. Now these are all busy people. That they are dropping everything at short notice and flying to the United States shows just how seriously they take it, how pivotal a moment they think this really might be. Know that while it's clear that they're alarmed at Trump's total failure in holding to a very basic agreed line in the face of Putin's charm and KGB-trained arts of persuasion, they have been careful not to criticise in public. So, what will they be doing in the White House tomorrow? What will they be hoping can be achieved? If you're trying to persuade someone who could easily take offence and throw a hissy fit, for instance, you'd be highlighting the things that they want that you do agree with and praising them for their wisdom on those parts. And on the more neutral bits, seeking to frame those in a way that sounds exactly like what the person already thought they meant, but just easing the definitions further in your direction. And then that leaves lots of relationship capital left to be expended on the tough parts, talking them down from something that you may feel would be positively harmful. So one of the things they can agree on, for instance, Trump has said that he quickly wants to see a three-way meeting with him, Putin and Zelensky. The Europeans are very keen on that as something that Trump wants to see, largely because they are pretty clear it's something that Putin really wants to avoid. So if it pushes Putin into the position where he has to keep saying no to Trump, that makes it slightly less likely that Trump just pitches in on Russia's side. For the neutral items, well, they're very keen to explore the comments made by Steve Witkoff today, which one assumes put into the public domain something that was in the private briefing that Trump had given the Europeans about security guarantees. Witkoff said that Trump was sort of favourable to the idea of what are described rather vaguely as Article 5-like protections, and this was apparently accepted by the Putin side in Alaska, although bearing in mind Witkoff was widely derided for totally misunderstanding something Putin had put to him in his pre-summit meeting. So we should probably take his interpretation of any events with a pretty big pinch of salt. But all the more reason, the wording is ambiguous. That represents an opportunity. If the Europeans can encourage this position, but do it in a way that frames it in its most robust interpretation, and have Trump accept that, that would be a real win. Whereas if Putin's definition of such a guarantee is allowed to define what those words mean, you have to assume it will be rendered essentially meaningless. Well, how do we know that? Well, because Putin's specific ask from the summit strongly suggests he is seeking to set things up so as to facilitate future action where Russia launches a push deeper into Ukraine. The area of the Donbass controlled by Ukraine is separated by the area that isn't by robust defences, what's referred to as the fortress belt. This is made up of 4 large cities, several other towns, a line around 31 miles long. Ukraine has built this up over the last 11 years, reinforcing this as a strategic point of defence. The success of its preparation played its part in routing Russia's initial attempts to take the country at the start of the war in 2022. So if this area were to be given up to Putin, as he is demanding, there are areas with large populations that would be ceded, areas with significant critical raw materials would be handed over. It would be gifting something to Putin, something that Russia has found difficult to take by force, and that it would likely continue to find difficult to take. But also strategically, it would put the Russians past that effective line of defence, opening up much easier lines of attack into the rest of the country. But it's all right, says Steve Witkoff and President Trump, because Vladimir is willing to sign a piece of paper saying that he wouldn't do such a thing. Just to get a sense of what that would look like, here's a picture of Boris Yeltsin, former Russia president, signing exactly such a piece of paper saying that Russia won't ever invade Ukraine. See? It would look exactly like that. So that's the case that Ukraine and Europe need to be putting to President Trump on Monday. Conceding that area to Putin is effectively broadly akin to Ukraine surrendering. According to a German government official, they will also try again to bring Trump back to thinking he might slap sanctions or tariffs onto Russia in the meantime. The wind already changed on that one, I suspect, since we saw Trump administration officials saying that of course you couldn't put tariffs on Russia if your aim is to bring them to the table. Which is kind of weird, because Trump slapped tariffs on every other country in the world in order, apparently, to bring them to the table. But as always, it pays to remember, none of the words have meanings. They say whatever suits the argument of the day. There is no attempt to establish principles that are then consistently upheld. It is post-truth politics in action. No wonder they get on so well with Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, reality continues to unfold with the official story of what's happening being completely at odds with, what's happening. So the Trump administration was vigorously denying today that the European leaders were coming to the White House in order to prevent President Zelensky from being bullied into accepting Putin's terms.
This is such a stupid media narrative that they're coming here tomorrow because Trump is going to bully Zelensky into a bad deal. We've been working with these people for weeks on this stuff. They're coming here tomorrow because they chose to come here tomorrow. We invited them to come.
One UK official was quoted, however, by Politico as saying this about the unfolding events after meetings that have been taking place. Zelensky must not be cornered or bullied. Europe will not be rolled over. We genuinely welcome President Trump's efforts, but he misjudged with the overfamiliarity and accommodation of Putin. I suspect even more robust language than that was likely being used in private. Obviously, to make it public, even via anonymous officials, would be to jeopardize the attempt, so that won't happen. The danger here is that, in spite of all of this, the metaphorical wind has already changed, by which I mean that President Putin has already achieved an important piece of reframing of this debate all of his own. Before, we might have been talking about whether the line of grudging acceptance of Russian occupation would be set at the current front line, or whether Russia should be required to retreat from certain areas they have made inroads into. It had never occurred to anyone before Putin put it on the table that peace might look like Ukraine agreeing to non-violently walk away from other territory, to cede territory that Russia had failed to conquer. Now Putin has achieved a major shift in the terms of reference. He has widened the Overton window, if you will. Now people are debating and arguing about whether and how much extra land would need to be given over to Putin in a peace deal. A major victory for Ukraine is now defined as holding the existing lines rather than giving up more, whereas previously a major victory for Ukraine would have been pulling territory back. This reframing, of course, is the actual art of the deal. Rather odd that the Trump team seems to have failed to pick up on it, but then I guess it's not something they actually care about, so there's no particular reason why they would. What's going to happen tomorrow? Well, if they're being sensible, whatever it is, it will be kept off camera. But that will likely be Trump's call, so that may not apply if Trump is looking for another great TV moment. Because look, after all, he has lots of the leaders of the most powerful nations of the West coming to him to pay court to him. Trump wants the Ukraine war, like everything else, to be about him, while being able to blame it all on Joe Biden, of course. So this is his birthday come early in that regard. And he already knows that all of these people coming, they're going to flatter and praise him in public. So some of that is definitely going to happen. Assuming nothing goes off the rails, I would expect a fudge. Trump wants strategic ambiguity and uncertainty. It's what he uses to keep the attention on him. So with lots of important people coming to lobby him to take a certain position, he will have the instinct to draw out his decision on at least part of that for as long as he can. Which means mealy-mouthed words, warm vibes. After the event, MAGA people saying, "See, nobody got bullied, fake news," as though there was no possibility someone might have set off a chain reaction to end up there. It will be a fascinating event in any case. Expect a certain amount of cringe as well. And it will be an extremely significant point in terms of the sort of fight that Ukraine is going to have on its hands for the coming months. So in spite of the likely cringe, we have to watch and watch carefully.